A wave of low-skilled migration is about to become eligible for indefinite leave to remain and crush the public finances. And there's one of the people to blame for that. And he talks about how when Boris Johnson's administration unveiled its new immigration system in 2020, it promised to give top priority to those with the highest skills and the greatest talents, and overall reduce migration numbers. But what we actually got was the Boris wave, an unprecedented surge that saw net migration rise from 184,000 to almost 1 million in the year to June 2023. Now, that's net migration, which is to say immigration in minus emigration out. As we always say, net migration is the wrong measure. The only measure that counts is gross migration, which is to say the gross figure in. But anyway, let's use that 906,000, even though the gross migration in was about 1.3 million. He says it's hard to argue that what we have currently is a system geared towards bringing in the brightest and best. It's hard to argue that. Instead, we have a system designed less for economic dynamism than for alleviating short-term pressure on the public sector. And what he means here is that immigration is used to get cheap labor in, to get jobs in the public sector, particularly the care sector, filled, and basically to knock any other costs down the road for another government to worry about. He goes on, the policy that best illustrates this is the social care visa. Less than a year after debuting the new system, Boris and his ministers announced that carers would be added to the shortage occupation list. And he says the costs of this policy are becoming clear. The Office for Budget Responsibility has calculated that a low-skilled worker arriving at age 25 will immediately become a net burden on the public purse. By 75, if still resident in the UK, they will have cost the public a total of 421,000. If they live to 85, that figure is almost 800,000. And these are indisputably low-skilled workers. He believes the last 3 years of care worker immigration into the UK will cost roughly 61 billion net over the foreseeable future. And this is, of course, likely to be an understatement, because remember that each person arriving on the care visa scheme brought an average of at least one more dependent. And he reckons the cost of this scheme to the British taxpayer is likely to be £84 billion, which Boris Johnson, in this case, the man to blame, knocked that payment down the road a little bit so that he didn't have to worry about it, which is ridiculous when we remember the idea behind the policy was to save money. He says here, a huge share of social care is paid out of the public purse and from local authority budgets in particular. Spending decisions made in Westminster meant those budgets fell down in real terms, and that there was relatively little money for pay rises. And that's why they wanted to get in the cheaper care workers from abroad. Rather than pay out what the government estimated would be around $5 billion a year to give every single care worker in the country a pay rise, it chose to import cheaper workers instead. But here's the thing, after 5 years, these care workers will be free to apply for indefinite leave to remain. If they receive it, they'll be free to leave the sector and work somewhere else for higher pay. And the government in turn will resort to bringing in more workers to fill those vacancies which they just left. The short-term saving of avoiding a pay rise today is leading us into a fiscal catastrophe, by which he means the money coming in to government is going to be short and it's going to have to be raised in other ways. And he says, once you see this happening, you see it everywhere in the immigration system, including the glut of student visas issued, motivated in many cases by the prospect of 2 years' work on the graduate visa route. What's that saying is that people come in as students, and then after they've done their 1 year or 2 year course, they're allowed to stay for another 2 years to find a job, to find often a minimum income job, which a lot of British people themselves are trying to find at the same time. So, if you're looking for a minimum income job at the present, basically you're competing with the rest of the world, quite literally. So it seems it's a terrible thing that the government have done to the British citizens. Why did the government do this? As usual, short-termism. As far as students are concerned, the Migration Advisory Committee puts it that the sector has a, quote, over-reliance on immigration, because the higher fees charged to foreign students are what is keeping the sector from toppling over. Well, if the sector can't survive without foreign students, it doesn't deserve to survive. So we do have this being immigration used basically just as a stopgap to knock costs further down the road. As he concludes here, over the next 2 years, many of those who arrived since 2021 will become eligible for indefinite leave to remain. Once this is granted, no matter how expensive they may turn out to be in the future, they can stay. So the priority for the government should be preventing this from happening by extending the time taken for eligibility, imposing fiscal contribution thresholds, by which he means imposing minimum salaries that you have to acquire before you can get the job. And in the longer term, shifting towards a guest worker model for short-term, low-wage work. The alternative is too costly to contemplate. A guest worker model. Absolutely, a guest worker model, not a get immigration in order to get indefinite leave to remain model.